thank you so much for everyone for coming in on this journey. This is not a quick fix thing. This is part of being in relationship. And we want to equip you all to grow in your faith as disciples of Jesus and to equip you to pour into others and disciple others. So at that point, last week we had Charles Jackson talking about the big picture of God's mission, God's heart for the world. And tonight, inviting Andrew Craig. Andrew Craig I've known for many years. We grew up at Camp Luther near Mission, or in Mission, British Columbia together. So known for many years, and so it's been fun to reconnect. Andrew's coming up to teach at CLBI later this year. So let us give this over to Andrew. Yes, Christian is there waving his hands. He is...
Oh, hi Christian, how are you?
Yeah, oh yeah, they're from the same, they grew up at the same church. So yes.
Christian's mom and I met in Sunday school when we were about 6 years old. And so
awesome. So Andrew, you got to share the where you're from an orange juice or juice question. Okay, and then you just take it over.
I feel obligated to say orange now. No, I am Andrew Craig. I'm from Pincher Creek, Alberta, and I like peach juice. That's my there's a Tropicana peach juice that I really like. So yeah, and it's a real honor to be able to teach you guys tonight. It's something that I've been excited about, but nervous about too. I stepped away from ministry due to disability about a year ago, and it's been a while since I've been in a circumstance like this, and so it's a bit, I feel a little rusty, but I'm hoping I'll shake the rust off tonight for you. So we're going to talk about God's heart for you. And that's an interesting way to phrase it, because so often we talk about our relationship with God, but it's also important to think about it in terms of God's relationship with us, how he sees me, how he sees you as an individual. For me, I think I've always tried to better understand myself, understand my place in the world, and understand my faith, because even as a pastor, you get equipped with a lot of vast knowledge of Scripture, but you still face these really strong crises about who you are as a person, how you serve in the world, and what God's plan and purpose is for you. And I think that we all have that. The God's heart for you, what twigged me is that we do talk about growing in our faith, and therefore then being able to go out into the world and do things. And I think that those are the easier concepts that we're able to wrap our heads around. What's a lot harder to understand and a lot harder to be okay with is how God looks at us and his grace for us, and how that is really freeing. And so the hope for me for tonight is that I can hopefully make you feel more confident in God's love for you and how he sees you. I'm going to try this because I'm a huge computer nerd and I wanted to do this. So there's going to be 3 points we talk about tonight. And the first one is reality. Okay, now that might sound very broad, but we're going to be looking basically here at the idea that this is God's relationship with creation, with us. So God, when we look at Genesis, when we look at the creation account, when he creates, the world and the people in it and that, he doesn't create physical and spiritual separately. So we shouldn't be distinguishing in our faith the difference between the physical world and the spiritual world, because it's all one and the same. It's like saying that it would be like focusing on the yolk of an egg and not the white, even though it's all egg. It's all part of the same thing, the same substance. I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, but that means that as Christians who believe in God as the creator, we're the only ones that see the world for what it truly is and how it actually exists. The fact that we have a soul, for example, the fact that God has a relationship with the universe, with us as individuals, that's unique to us as Christians. And we don't tend to see that or really think about it or hear it, because that's definitely not the way the entire world comprehends existence. It doesn't comprehend existence as having a spiritual component. So the spiritual aspect of who we are is always part of our life. So why is that important? Well, when we look at God's heart for us, it's important to acknowledge his view of us. We spend time in prayer. We go to Bible study. We go to worship. We spend time with Christian people. We don't tend to really grasp all of God's relationship with us because God is always there. It's not just in those times. And, the funny thing is, sort of cognitively, yes, I know that. If somebody says it, I go, yeah, well, yeah, of course, God's always there. We've learned that since we were young. God's always present. But I don't know that on a daily basis for myself and for a lot of other people I've talked to, that we really understand that he sees us in every moment, in every struggle, in every joy, in every pain, and probably more uncomfortably, and why we don't tend to really think about this, is that he sees us in every sin and every struggle that we have that way. So God's heart for us, his seeking of us happens in all of these things, and in the case of sin, despite those things. So God is actually coming to us. The best way to illustrate what I'm talking about is looking at Adam and Eve right after sin has entered into the world. Adam and Eve have taken of the apple, and God's reaction, the way that God behaves, I guess you could say there. God is, the scriptures tell us that God is walking in the garden, and that if you look at it, God actually asks where they are. God, who created the universe and is always with us and always knows where we are, asks Adam where he is. Not because he doesn't know where Adam is, but because that's God's relationship with us. He is, God doesn't ask them to do something. He shows that his heart is actually doing it himself. When he does talk to them and they confess what's happened with them, he gives them promises right away. He tells them this is the result of your sin, but right away he promises Jesus. And so God, right off the bat, shows us that his heart is to constantly seek after us, even if we don't seek after him. He's looking to preserve that relationship. All right. All right. So when we look at who God is then to us in the scriptures and then who he promises to be, God goes through a humiliation, and that's actually like the technical theological term for Jesus's birth is the humiliation. He is becoming a human being. He's all powerful, all knowing, all seeing. He exists outside of time and space. God, who is way beyond our understanding, becomes a person, a human being in flesh and blood. He becomes confined to something very small compared to what he would normally be used to. To paraphrase, I don't know if any of you like Disney movies, but Aladdin, I've watched a lot of them with my kids lately, and Genie at one point says it's, unimaginable cosmic power in an living space, right? It shows God's heart, though, that he comes to find us. He doesn't say, hey, step outside of reality, step outside of the existence I've created for you and come find me. He actually steps into it. So he comes to interact with his creation. And the greatest miracle, we see all these miracles in the New Testament that Jesus does, and a lot of times we sort of wish we could witness something like that, or man, what it would have been like to see Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead, to actually be there, to be a disciple and those kinds of things. And yet the greatest miracle is actually God being with us each and every day on a constant basis. We like to seek signs. We like the idea of miracles. We want mountaintops, and the disciples did too. If we look at Peter's reaction at the transfiguration, all of a sudden Peter, who's kind of prior to the crucifixion, Peter's kind of a dope over and over again. And at the transfiguration, he's like, hey, let's stay here. This is awesome. Cool things are happening. This is fun. It's exciting. Let's stay here. And we get like that too. But they don't help us see the real miracle of God's constant presence. So the key is seeing God coming to us and being with us, because being a human being is humiliating sometimes. Do you ever feel inadequate? I'm not good enough for others. I need to be more. I need to be better. Do you ever feel anxiety? I'm someone that has struggled with anxiety and anxiety attacks for decades. In fact, they started when I started at CLBI and moved away from home for the first time. Maybe you wonder what lies ahead, or worry about the consequences of what's come before. What if trouble comes? What if? Have you ever felt overwhelmed? That basically means that you don't know what you're feeling because it's simply way too much and you don't know which direction to go. The pile of crap in my life is so big right now, I don't know which. There aren't threads in pile of crap unless you've been eating. Anyway, I'm going to mix metaphors here because that's just how I'm going. But you don't know where to start. You don't know what to begin with. And it gets overwhelming. Have you ever felt like God is at a distance from you? See, we know God's promises. We know what the scriptures say. So obviously, he's not the one creating those feelings. He's not the one that is actually distant from us. God is actually present there in all of it. That's what he promises. And the greatest news about that is that his heart is always for me, for you. There's never a time where God is looking at you and shaking his head and hoping that you improve in some way, that you respond to his call and hoping that you'll be the one that he wants. That's not how God works. God is with you no matter who you are and what your struggle is. That doesn't show up great. Vulnerability. And this is about my relationship with God, our individual relationship with God. And I want to just talk briefly about the Apostle Paul, because I think that Paul is the best example of vulnerability in the Bible. So before Paul's conversion, when he's Saul, he is murderous, he's angry, he's guilty of sins that would make most of us, if we had committed them, would make most of us cringe. We know that because not just, Luke writes about it in Acts and recounts these things in Acts, but also because Paul comes back to it time and again about the things that he struggles. He talks about his sins and his regrets and his past over and over again. See, we see Paul as a hero of faith because we know what happened to him. But he wouldn't want you to tell him that. He struggled with affliction. He went to jail. He argued with Peter particularly, but he was somewhat an argumentative guy. He felt frustrated with himself, and he felt alone. He says in the book of Romans, I don't understand my own actions. I don't do what I want. I do the things that I hate. Now, if I do what I don't want, I agree with the law, and that is good. So now it's no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. Now, just quick show of hands. How many of you have actually had that conversation? I want to accomplish something, but I feel like I lack the ability to do it, right? And this is Paul. a hero of faith, a guy that we look up to. So we should be looking up to that as well, those conversations. We should be seeing Paul in his vulnerability and seeing that vulnerability as a true gift. In our modern world, vulnerability feels pretty foreign to most of us. It's actually something that we have to learn. And it's one of the reasons that we live in a world now that is as argumentative as it is because when our perspectives feel threatened, if we're willing to be vulnerable, we're willing to listen, we're willing to learn, we're willing to grow from another person's perspective. If we're feeling threatened and defensive, we're interested in making sure that a person understands where I'm coming from, and that's what comes first. So let me ask you, is a person stronger if they are open with their feelings and fears? Is a person sharing their story more brave than someone who remains stoic? I would say, yeah. Is it better to cry or to hold it in? I don't know about you, but I don't know generationally whether this is still the case, but growing up for me, and I think for those of us who are a little bit further on, you're not supposed to cry, especially men. You don't show that you're sad. You don't show that you're heartbroken. You pull that inside, and what makes you strong is the fact that you're going through hell and still say you don't need your friends. That's what the world sees as strength. So in the world, it's generally seen as strength to be reserved and weakness to be open. So we need to ask ourselves, if the way we see God is affected by our unwillingness to be vulnerable. We can see his heart for us. We know that he's always there, yet we feel like hiding. God willingly made himself vulnerable in Jesus. We have to realize God cannot be killed. Jesus cannot be killed on the cross unless he allows it to happen. Jesus is the ultimate display of God's heart for us and for you. Picture yourself going through, put yourself in Jesus's shoes, I guess. I don't know if you've ever done that. Most of us wouldn't because it's Jesus and it feels weird to do that. But really think about that. As a human being, picture yourself going step by step through his trial and his execution. Now, that's already, I think, a little bit uncomfortable. But try thinking about at which point you would tap out. How long before you reach a part in that story before you have to stop because you know you just couldn't follow through? So God saves us by being vulnerable. You might think that means that we have to learn to be vulnerable like that, like Jesus, that the goal would actually be, and I think that's what a lot of us believe, is that the goal is to be able to tough it out and be able to face that kind of a challenge. But that brings us around to what I started with. That's something to do. To us, it's vulnerable to admit that we need to grow. Is that actually vulnerable? Or is it harder to admit that there's nothing that I can do because Jesus already did it? Is it harder to admit that God's grace is sufficient for me? God's heart for us is all that matters. The most vulnerable thing that we can do in faith is to recognize that. Jesus says in John chapter 10, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me. I give them eternal life and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all. No one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one." So what are we doing here? Why study if God has come to us again and again and has done it all for us? We do this because it takes a lifetime to be comfortable with that truth, and because we know that there are others that need to hear it. We gather in these groups because we need support and the constant reminder that God's heart is for us, for you. And in your own head, you should say, for me. Like that, this is personal to you. There isn't a person in a screen here that doesn't need to know this. We gather because we should grow in our faith and understanding, knowing that this all-powerful God who created us is with us. It's hard to maintain hope. I don't know about you. I don't feel like I would be in a minority if I said 2020 sucks. Right? I feel like I have lost time. I feel like I have my kids who are young and only get to be young once are losing time. And it's infuriating to not know how long that's going to be. I need a sure thing. That's what I need. And God alone is the one that can give us hope. No matter what happens, I know that God is for me because he says so. It's not about my feelings. It's not about my worries, my concerns. It's because in his word, he says this is who he is. I don't have to worry about how I feel in here because I know that God's heart from the very beginning has been for each of his children, and that's you.